Welcome to this slow stitching video. Today I'm going to work on something that I have not worked on for quite a while, and I'm keen to get this project finished because I've got lots of ideas for lots of projects and videos, but I kind of feel like I need to clear the way a little bit and get some other things that I've started finished, and one of those things is this, the Roses needle book. So if you haven't already seen part one, I'll put a link to the first video that I did on this needle book in the description, but I'll just give you a little refresh because it has been a while. So this needle book was inspired by this gorgeous cross-stitched tablecloth that I sourced, and as soon as I brought it into my collection, I knew I wanted to use a piece of it as the front of a needle book. So this is the cover piece, which is this beautiful cross stitch, and it's on a lovely creamy linen. I've put this piece of tattered work on here with some stitching to define that, and the only other thing I've sort of done is a little bit of just canther stitching. I didn't want to do too much to the front cover because I want the star to be this beautiful cross stitch. So that's the cover. Then in terms of what I've done so far, I've also completed the inside cover. So there's a couple pockets here, there's a pocket here and a pocket here, and I've used lots of vintage fabrics and bits and pieces. I've stitched on some tatting, some crochet, and I've stitched into that some pieces of fabric, and I've used a piece of wool blanket as the base, and I've let some of that show through. Then I've completed my first signature page, which is this one. So again, here I've used vintage fabrics, some lovely vintage lace. This is a little internal page on this page, and I've done just simple stitching. I really wanted the emphasis to be on the fabrics, not so much the stitching. And on the reverse side of that one, a lovely big piece of that's actually a vintage sheet, some lovely bits and pieces, and I've mixed in a couple of modern fabrics as well. So this little one here. So that's the first page. Then my next page is this lovely, very finely stitched and very fine hanky. And all I've done with this is I've folded the hanky in half, and then I have just very carefully followed the scalloped edge, and we're using a single strand of just cotton sew-all thread. I've done a running stitch around just to stitch the folded hanky together, and it's just beautiful, that one. So that page is just going to be on its own. It's not going to have any further embellishment. Then the next page is this very pretty piece of this is a modern fabric. This is I'm pretty sure this might be a UR fabric. And this is one of the pages that I'm going to work on with you today. I'm actually going to embellish the other side here with some fabric patches. The next page will be this lovely doily that'll sit in the middle. Then I have a piece of wool blanket, and I'm going to put a couple of elements on this. Then the next page I finished was this very cute little page. I really love this page. It's got like these fabric bits that sort of poke out a little bit. And I've used a mixture of modern and vintage fabrics in this one. And I have done some embroidered thread painting on here. I've popped in this little butterfly, done a couple of little stitches, and just sort of running stitch. And I kept this bit here with the selvage colours. I thought that was really nice, this little beetle. And on the other side, it's just all that is pieced onto this lovely piece of vintage fabric with roses. So you can see that there is the rose theme is worked through with all the different fabrics. So you've got little roses here, roses here, roses here, and even this one has roses as well. So I really liked that page. And I've sort of made my pages not all the same width as my needle book. You can see this page is actually, when it's folded, it has this shorter part so that you can sort of see these other bits beyond. And then I've sort of put, you know, the little yo-yo so that it's almost like a little tag, a little turning tag on the end there. Then the next page will be this, just got this plain piece of linen, and so I'm going to be embellishing this page. And then the middle page is going to be this lovely, really beautiful worked, very fine worked doily. It's got very fine bullion knots and very fine blanket stitch to make these very pretty flowers. So that's a recap and a little flip through on my needle book. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to start working on the next page, which is going to be this one. So we'll pull that page out. And we're going to be patching some fabrics onto this side. Okay, so we're going to work on this lovely page here. Now I've got it positioned so that this is in its right way up. So when I turn it over, I feel like this is the right way. So we're going to work on patching some fabrics onto here. And I've already pulled out the fabrics that I'm going to use just to save a bit of time. So I've got this lovely piece of scrap vintage fabric. Here it's got a little bit of selvage on the side and goes that way, doesn't it, because of the bows. And I am going to leave this edge where it's fraying. I might just trim off just these extra long bits, but I kind of like that little sort of fuzzy look up there. So we're going to put this one down here. Now what I'm going to do is this will be folded, and what I can do so that I know where the center line is, I can just pop a pin in, and that way I sort of know when I'm positioning my fabrics where they're going to sit on the page within the book once the book's all put together. So I know that that's my center. Oh, just pulled that pin out. So I know that that's my center. Okay. So when I'm positioning these now, I just need to think about where it's going to be stitched, because obviously I don't want to lose too much of these flowers. So we might need to pop this piece over this way a little bit. And I've got this is also a lovely vintage piece. And now I'm going to think about whether or not I want this piece to extend over this side, or if I want it to be solely on this side when it's in the book. And I think I do want it to peek out a little bit. So we're going to pop it sort of there. Then I have this lovely piece of vintage ticking, and I'm thinking this would be nice here, because then we can sort of use that to put the needles in. So I'm going to work out roughly what size I want. So I think I want it about there. Put a little snip in there. And we'll see if this will rip. I'm not sure if it will. Yep, so rip that piece. Okay, so about there. I don't want to cover too much of that flower. And I think we might snip it about there. Okay, just pull off those little threads. Okay, so we'll pop that piece in there. Now you can see that I'm not covering this in the extent where I'm going all the way to the edge. I don't mind if a little bit of the other fabric is showing through. That's totally okay. And then I've pulled out this piece of, this is just a modern patchwork fabric. So I've got this little bit of blue spot because I thought it picks up the blue in here. And I'm thinking we want to put this piece here as well to sort of act as a place to hold needles. So we'll work out roughly, maybe it's about that wide. Snip it about there. I'll see if I can tear this one. Some of the modern patchwork fabrics are a bit harder to tear, I've found. Okay, so we've got that there. And we might even tuck it up underneath that piece, or do we want to go slightly over, or maybe slightly over the top, like that. And we'll snip it about there. See if I can tear it this way. Sometimes they tear one, yeah, see they tear one way, but they don't really like to tear the other. So we'll cut that bit. And then we can sort of pull a couple of the threads so it's not such a clean cut. There we go. Okay, so I think that piece might go there like that. Okay, so I'm happy with that layout. So then I have pulled out just a couple of little bits that have been trimmed from doing other things. So there's like this tiny little tag, which I think is quite cute. So something like that could be stitched on there. And then I've got these little scraps as well. So I'm thinking, do I want to add a little rose down here, or the little button, or maybe both? We could trim this, so snip that in half. So we've almost got like a little postage stamp rose. It could go there. And then with the butterfly, no, it's quite frayed, or I can, maybe I'll snip out this butterfly. So we could pop this little butterfly down there like that, or maybe there. And I've got this tiny little flower. So we'll trim that. And this might not go on this page, but we'll have a look and see if there's anywhere. No, I think I'll save that little bit to pop somewhere else. I think that's good. I've got, and that sort of didn't match the colors of this, so I think that looks really good. Okay, so we've got that. Then I've also got a little bit of crochet doily left, so I'm wondering if we can sort of pop that in, maybe down the bottom or at the top. I don't think I like it at the top. I think I might like it down the bottom, but then maybe that's a bit too heavy. I've also got a bit of lace, and I was thinking of using this as the tie for the whole needle book. Do I want to put a bit of lace? I feel like that's a little bit too much actually. I kind of liked. I might have a look and see what other trims I've got that are a bit smaller maybe. I do like that, how it sort of creates this scalloped edge. Okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to have a look at what laces I've got. I'm going to come back. Okay, well, I've got myself into a spot of bother now because I've got 4 options and I like them all. So we've got this really pretty ribbon lace, and I'm thinking I could sort of put it here like that, so it doesn't go over this bit, it just sort of starts there. So I really like that because obviously it picks up the lovely pink. Then I've got this piece of crocheted lace, which is nice and subtle and blends in with the fabric of the backing. Then I've got the original, and I think this might be too wide to use as the tie. So, and this has, obviously it's got the rose motif on it. So I do want to get this in here somewhere. So I've got that. But then maybe you lose the roses. Maybe that will look better against the pink blanket. So the show, okay. All right, so that takes that one out of the running, and I'll use that somewhere on that page. So that's good. And then I've got this sweet little one. There's little flowers. So I think I might take that one out. I think that maybe it doesn't stand out enough, so I'll pop that one away. So then it's now going to be between this one or the pink ribbon. And I think I like the pink ribbon. And I can probably use this somewhere else on another page. Yes, okay. The pink ribbon it is. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm just going to clean up this end, that, and then we'll stop it a bit short, and we'll stop it in line here, snip it there. Okay, all right, so those are all the elements now. So the next, what I'm going to do now is what I usually do when I've made a layout like this is I make sure I take a photo. So I want to take a photo so that when I take these bits off, I remember where they go. So I'm going to take a photo, then I'm going to pin down the base, like the main fabric elements, and I will stitch those in place. And then I'll come in over the top with the little extra bits. so I've pinned my two main pieces down, and I like to use the little clover applique pins for doing this kind of work. And for this piece, I don't want any stitches to show. So I'm actually going to use my bottom line thread, which is the thread that I use for my piecing. And I'm going to do just invisible stitch. And then on this piece down here, I've picked this lovely blue, and I'm going to do 2 strands, and I'll do some cantha stitch across this way on this one. So we'll start with the big piece at the top. So I've got my needle here, and all I'm going to do is just work close to the edge, some stitches here and around here and here, and then I'll just do a couple of rows through the middle as well, just to secure it in place. And for that stitch, I'm going to do, I don't want to do too big a stitch on the back, so I'll probably do quite small stitches all the way across. So to start, what I want to do is I want to make sure that my knotted end ends up behind, because I don't want my knot end to be on this side of the fabric. So what I'll do is I'll come in just underneath to bring my needle up, and I'll bury that little thread end underneath there. And then I'm going to do a small stitch on the front, but I'm not going to do a really big stitch on the back, because I don't want really big stitches on the back here either. I just want them to sort of blend in a bit. So we're going to do a tiny stitch on the front and a sort of normal size stitch on the back. And I will continue all the way across, doing that to secure this piece of fabric. And you can see, because I like to use a milliner's needle. This is a milliner's needle 11. This is what I use for my piecing. It's a very fine needle, but it means that I can draw a couple of stitches onto my needle as I go, which makes the process a bit quicker. So you can see on the back, you can see the stitches, but because of the thread I'm using, they're not super noticeable. So I will just continue to do that across this piece, and then I'll come back when I'm finished and we'll work on this piece down here. Okay, so I finished invisible stitching this piece of fabric down. You can see it sits nice and flat, and you can see that on the back you can see the stitches, but they're not overly noticeable. Like when you first turn the page, you won't really notice them too much. Obviously when I do these blue stitches, they are going to show up, but that's okay. I don't mind that happening. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch down this piece, and for this one I'm just going to do running stitches in lines going this way. So again, I'm using 2 strands of DMC floss, and I'm going to start here. I'm going to work this way and then come like that. So I want to place the stitches close to the outside edge. And actually what I might do is just go around the whole outside edge first and then come back and do lines. So again, you can see I've buried my tail between the 2 pieces of fabric, and I'm just going to do a nice even running stitch around this piece of fabric. So again, I'm placing a few stitches on my needle, which I feel just makes the flow of doing a running stitch or a canthus stitch a bit easier. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll continue stitching on and come back. Okay, so I've stitched that piece down. You see the little cross stitches, and I just went around the outside edge. I'm not going to do cantha or anything like that in the middle. So that looks really sweet. So now I'm going to stitch down my little postage stamp. And I'm just wondering, hold that thought for a minute. Okay, so I have invisible stitched down my piece of ticking here, and then you'll have seen that I invisible stitched down my little fabric tag here. Now I used the invisible stitch and I didn't use that blue thread because it's such a small piece of fabric, and again I didn't want the stitching to detract away from that itty bit of fabric. And then I've stitched down the little butterfly piece of fabric, and again I used my scalloped edge scissors to cut around that, and I've now just pinned in place the ribbon. So now I'm going to invisible stitch that down. So again, I'm using my bottom line thread in my lovely neutral colour and my milliner's needle. And I'm just going to start at one end, and I'm going to work my way sort of where the stitches are on the ribbon, down one side and then back up the other. Again, I'm actually going to try and bring the tail of my thread up behind this blue fabric. Okay, and into the ribbon so that I can bury my thread end. Underneath that piece of blue fabric. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to invisible stitch all the way along. To fix this piece of ribbon down. Okay, so once I've finished that, I'll come back. Okay, so there we have it. My page is now finished and everything is stitched down. Let's show you the details. So I just trimmed the end of the ribbon off. I did think about bringing it to the other side, but I didn't quite like it. So I've just invisible stitched that down and trimmed it off there. And then this is what the other side looks like. So you can see a bit of the blue stitching and obviously a little bit of the pink stitching, and you can see the invisible stitches, but they're not overly noticeable. So now we can put that page into my needlebook. So it will sit in there like that. So now when you open it, you'll have that page, and then you'll see this little bit here, a little bit of the ribbon poking through this lovely vintage fabric, a bit of this vintage fabric. And then when we turn all the pages back over, and you'll see this side with these little bits and pieces. So I'm really happy with how that's turned out. So the next page I'm going to work on now will be this piece of wool blanket. So we'll pop that one out and we'll do some work on this one. So the next page that I'm working on is the pink wool blanket page, and I'm not going to overly sort of collage on this page. I'm going to leave one whole side completely on its own bare, and that's because this beautiful doily will open up against the back of it. So I'm only going to embellish one side. And I've laid out what I'm going to do. So I've got my little cross stitch that I did here. I'm going to stitch that down with this thread, and I've got a little button. I've had these little ceramic buttons for a while, so I want to put those in. And then I've got a pretty piece of fabric here with this little bit of trim little vintage yo-yo and another heart button, and I'm going to stitch this down with this green fabric. So that's my plan. I've marked the center so I knew where to sort of lay everything out. So now we can start stitching this down. So I'll start with this side. So we'll just move these pieces up here out of the way. And I will pin this bit of fabric down first. And I'm just going to do just a simple running stitch around the outside. Now that running stitch will show through onto the other side, but I'm okay with that. I kind of like how that happens. Okay, so just pin that in place just so it's not going to move too much. And what have we got here? Lots of threads. I'm going to use 2 strands for this, I think. So find ourselves 2 strands. There we go. No, Rosie. Rosie, the cat, is sitting next to me, eyeing off the table. She wants to jump on because I think when I am filming videos and I start talking to you all, she thinks that I'm talking to her. But I'm not talking to you, Rosie. Okay, so like I've shown before, I've buried my little tail end at the back there. And I'm just going to do a nice even running stitch. No, Rosie. Just getting ready to jump on the table. Okay, so I'm just going to go around the outside, just doing a nice running stitch. Okay, so for my little trim here, I'm going to invisible stitch that down. So I've got my bottom line thread, and I'll come up behind here just to bury that little thread end. And I'm just going to do some little invisible stitches going straight down and then back up again. So a little tiny stitch on the front with a longer stitch on the back, and on the back with this thread it should be almost fairly invisible as well, because it's such a fine thread against the wool fabric. It shouldn't stand out too much. So I'll just continue like that and get this little piece stitched down, and I'll come back once I've done that. Okay, so I finished invisible stitching down my braid, and I've also invisible stitched down my little yo-yo, and on the back you can hardly see those stitches. You can sort of see where the stitching is, but you can't really see the thread. You can see the green thread, but that's all. So that's exactly how I thought it would turn out. So now I'm going to sew my little button on. And what I'm thinking is I'm going to try and stitch this on without coming all the way through to the blanket, because I don't want this ugly little few stitches here of just red. I think that'll be a bit random. So I'm going to attempt to try and not stitch through to the back. So we'll see how we go with that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and come up between here and into the folds of this yo-yo, roughly where the button's going to go. I'll just come up straight through the middle there. So I'll bury my thread behind there so you can't see that. And then we'll thread my button through. Thread it through that hole. Like that. And then what I'm going to try and do is just run my needle into the yo-yo underneath, but not go through to the wool on the back, and try and come up in that hole whilst trying to make this a nice tight stitch as well. Not asking for too much, am I? There you go. Okay, so that's worked out well. All right, so go through there. So what I'll do is I'll pull that stitch tight and then pull this stitch tight. So I've got 2 stitches on my little button. So what I might do now is, rather than go through the button holes, I'm just going to thread my needle into the yo-yo and come up and pull that stitch nice and tight. And then sort of underneath the yo-yo, or underneath the button, I'm just going to do some like little stitches behind the button. So I'm securing the button in place, but not going all the way through, because I don't want to go through to that. So I'm going to come up there. I'm going to go, right, get my needle to come through that button. It's a ceramic button as well, so it's not super forgiving, to be honest. Okay, pull it through nice and tight. Just trying to pull that yo-yo fabric. Okay. Because I don't want this red thread to show on the yo-yo either, so that's good. Let's pull it through. So I think it's making it tight enough so that it's certainly not gonna wobble around too much. Okay. Okay, I think that's probably good. I think that's enough stitches to secure it in place anyway. So I will come through to the back like that, just so I can tie off. And I'll just do a knot. So you'll see almost like a little French knot on the back. And I will run my needle behind there so it's not coming through to the other side. And tuck that in. You can almost bury that little thread, that little knot. There we go. Okay, so there's my little button on my little yo-yo. So I think that looks quite cute. So next I need to stitch down my little cross stitch piece, which is going to go here. So I'll just pin that in place. Like so. Okay, so now I will do a running stitch around the outside of this. Okay, so I finished stitching down my little rows with a running stitch and I've attached my little button. Now I couldn't really avoid stitching that all the way through on the blanket. So what I did was I came in and I did a little sort of stitch through here to make it look like a little cross. So you've got this bit here with this little cross, which I think looks kind of cute. So that's that page done now. So we can pop that into my needle book. So take all the pages one by one and put them back in. got that one, that little hanky. Then got this page, goes like that. And then we'll have a little blanket page. And then we've got the lovely doily. And we've got my little tab page there. Look at that. And then we've got the next page that I'm going to work on, which is this plain linen one. And then our center, which is this little doily. So we fold that close like that. So there's our little rose. Looks very sweet. We'll turn the pages. And there's our other little patch of fabric with our little button. Okay, so next we will work on this page. So I'm going to end this video here. So this will be part 2 of the Roses Needle book. And when I come back with you next, we will work on that last page, and I will also stitch the needle book together and work on finishing the edge of the cover. So that will be in part 3. So I hope you have enjoyed part 2 of the Roses Needle book, and I will be back with you again soon. Happy stitching!